All right, everybody. Welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. I am Glenn West. That is Sonny Ship. We are here on a Wednesday talking a little LSU schedule reveal, talking a little LSU injury report updates for this weekend's game against Ole Miss. We're going to have plenty to dive into here. This morning, we'll be back later with you guys in the week too with a game preview and kind of our predictions, kind of deep dive into this game a little later in the week. But yeah, I think we just wanted to hop on and just kind of give our thoughts. Obviously, last night was a big night for the future of what this schedule is going to look like for LSU and the SEC. They gave us the conference released its next 4 years of opponents and kind of where those games are going to be. Just to kind of backtrack it a little bit even further, on Monday we learned that LSU's, we're going into this 9-game schedule starting in 2026, 9-game conference schedule. We learned that the 3 permanent opponents here over the next 4 years are going to be Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss for LSU. So that'll be, the yearly opponents that LSU takes on over the next, at least 4 years, and then we'll see kind of what happens after that. But really, the big news on Tuesday was just kind of the big schedule reveal and which of the other teams LSU is going to face over the next 4 years, and lots of interesting things to, I think, look at there in terms of what the future of this schedule looks like. For me personally, I just look ahead to 2026, and you get Texas A&M, you get Alabama, you get Texas, all coming to Baton Rouge next year. That's a big one. And then of course Clemson with the kind of the opener there, the non-conference game against Clemson. So that's a really nice look at the next season and what that could potentially look like. That'll be a lot of fun. Sonny, just kind of quick thoughts on what you like about this schedule, what you have just kind of noticed about what LSU is going to be facing here over the next couple of years.
Well, if you're looking at next year's schedule, home schedule, I mean that might be the best that I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Assuming that Clemson is not the pile of elephant dump that they are right now, and that they're going to be, a top 25, a top 10 team like you assumed that they would be when you set the series. I mean, and then you toss Texas A&M, you toss Alabama, you toss Texas into there. I mean, that really sets up for an awesome home schedule when you look at it just from a fan's point of view. You've got some huge games in there. Obviously, getting Texas back in Tiger Stadium after the way that they treated LSU fans when they went there in 2019, that's going to be a huge storyline.
yeah,
And so, overall, and when you really look at it, you go to Arkansas, you go to Ole Miss, which is kind of interesting that you're going to go to Ole Miss in back-to-back years, as well as Arkansas too.
and you also
So
host
those are two,
you host Texas A&M in back-to-back years too. So you get them this
yes,
year at
yes,
home, and you get them next year at
yeah,
home. So
yeah.
yeah,
So and I mean not that that's like a
yeah,
big deal. I mean if you had to go to Bryant Denny or if you had to go between the hedges in Athens 2 years in a row, then I think you might have something to complain about. But hey, I am glad to see Mississippi State back on the schedule. That's just it's kind of like when you go back and you look at that series history. I mean, LSU has not dominated anyone in football else like it has Mississippi State.
yeah,
Just that series is just tremendous advantage for LSU. But then you get to go to Rocky Top,
yeah,
and so I think when you add the home, when you add the home schedule that you have, you get to go back to Jordan Hare, you get to go back to Rocky Top, and I think it just sets up for I think it sets up from a good schedule from that point of view.
yeah,
Looking ahead to how tough it could be. I mean, who the hell knows? Who the hell
yeah,
knows? And that's because of the transfer portal.
yeah,
What these rosters look like right now are not going to look anything remotely similar
yeah.
when LSU's prepared to go on those road trips. But you know, overall, my first impressions are LSU fans. You gotta love it, and I think it's a very favorable schedule when you look at it just from the home away point of view.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, I think probably the thing that really sticks out to me and why I love the fact that they're going to this 9-game schedule is I think it's it's going to be great to play all of these teams in the span of 2 years. You know, you get Auburn back on the schedule. You mentioned Tennessee, getting them back on the schedule. It's been a little while since LSU's played them. It's been a little while since LSU had played Vanderbilt before this year. Kentucky, I can't remember the last time LSU played Kentucky. Like there's just some really. I love the fact that the conference is getting into a more um, I guess I'm trying to find the right word for it, but just a more equilibrium in terms of how often you're playing these teams every other year, and in some cases every year still. So I really like that aspect of this thing, and I think it's really going to see kind of what the balance of power in the conference looks like going forward. Because I do think that there are going to be some teams that feel like they got the short end of the stick of the schedule, and other teams that felt like they got a favorable schedule here with their permanent draws and things of that nature. But I think that there's never been more parity in this conference, and the fact that they're bringing in it to a place where there's going to be even more of just kind of back and forth with these teams and being able to play them so close together. I really like that opportunity and that aspect of things. So yeah, I really was interested to see what it would look like for LSU. In 2027, you finally get Georgia back on the schedule. You got to go to Georgia. I think it's been 14 years since LSU went to Georgia. That was the crazy game
That
where
never
Odell.
here, huh?
Yeah, I don't remember much about that game except
Yeah.
for Odell
That had
Beckham.
to be that had to be Mettenberger's return to Athens
Yes,
in
that
the
was.
year that Cam Cameron, when you had Beckham, you had Landry,
Yeah,
and I remember that game specifically because it went down to the last drive.
yeah,
And who was it? Was it Aaron Murray? Wasn't he the
yeah,
Georgia quarterback? Aaron Murray.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Aaron Murray. Aaron Murray led them on a drive, and then if memory's serving me right, LSU's counter drive to end the game fell flat on fourth down, if I'm
Okay,
not mistaken.
all right.
That was a
Yeah,
hell of a game.
I didn't remember much about the game except for one of the kickoffs. It might have been even the opening kickoff. Beckham's back there in the back of the end zone, and they kick it pretty much through the end zone, but Beckham just reaches his hand up there and
No, one
grabs it
handed
with
it.
one
Yeah,
hand. I was like, "Oh
yeah,
my god, that's just
yeah,
that is just freakish athletic ability that I
yeah.
just would never be able to have." And so that was a really cool moment there. But yeah, I mean, just like getting all these teams on the schedule over
And
the
they go to
course.
Georgia. They go to Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina that year
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
And when you look at it from a fan's perspective, it's like, okay, those are not road trips that LSU fans are really used to making. You go back and
those
you
are
pull some
those are hard
nostalgia
ones too.
out of it, and you're like, man, I can remember back in the day, when it was. I mean, hell, that was, you take South Carolina out of the equation, but Florida and Georgia, it was like, whoa, that's the cream of the crop in the
Yeah,
SEC East. I kind of like that 2027 schedule where you got Missouri, you got Vandy, you got Florida, you got Georgia, you got South Carolina. It's like you got a kind of like a little rendition of the old SEC Eastern Division,
yeah,
when they were
yeah.
split into two.
Yeah.
So
I did want to have just one little question before we move on to some injury stuff for this game, but your thoughts on the three permanent opponents? We were on our board the last couple days, and there were people that were a little mad that Florida or Bama wasn't on there, and I think that my whole thing was I think the conference did about as well as they could from a permanent opponent standpoint because
yeah,
there are other games that those teams play that mean a lot to those fan bases, and you just weren't going to be able to fit them all in. And so i
yeah,
think I think from my perspective, I actually really like the A&M game continuing to be a permanent
yeah,
one. I think that can be a really strong rival brewing there. I think there's some fun disdain between each of those fan bases right now, and those are pretty competitive games each and every year. I love Ole Miss staying on the schedule for sure, and Arkansas. I think I could probably take or leave, but I probably would have replaced Arkansas with Florida or Bama if I had the choice. But yeah, like I think that overall it was just about as well as they could have hoped for from a schedule standpoint. What's your thoughts on the permanence though?
I like the A&M. I like the A&M. I always go back to, man, I don't remember how long ago. I think it was like 5, 6 years ago, but. when I read a story about the LSU A&M, how I thought it was a rivalry in the making and stuff, and the board absolutely hated it. Like I had people like within the company, like Joel Cox, shout out to one of the bosses, and people like that, Casey Cosper, who were like, dude, I have never seen a publisher write a column that got downvoted more than that. I mean, there was like over 200 like downvotes to
Oh,
it, because
holy
people
smokes.
just hated that idea, man. I'll have to pull that up. I'll have to pull that up
That
and
shows the
rebump that.
disdain, though, for that program, right? I
It
think they're
shows the
making your point for
disdain.
you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And my point at the time was that look, LSU and A&M, they were really kind of getting into the crux of some of those recruiting battles, coming off of kind of on the heels 4 or 5 years after the Speedy Noel signing with them, and just you had some other battles in there. LSU obviously taking Harold Perkins away from them, so I just thought there was a lot in the makings. There
Yeah.
was a lot in the makings that could just make that the rival that LSU has never really had since Ole Miss, or I guess since Tulane. If you really consider that one. As far as Ole Miss, I mean, the Ole Miss LSU rivalry is as hard as it is for some to believe was a little before my time. So I didn't grow up with Ole Miss really being that rival. I grew up with my grandmother and them, having that disdain for Ole Miss and stuff, but I guess it was just never really that close of a series in my
Pageantry is the name.
lifetime,
That's the
you
word that
know.
comes to mind when I think of the Ole Miss LSU game,
And then it
pageantry.
kind of bounced around. I think if they would have kept the game, they played the game in Jackson in some years and stuff, and so I think that I think that the rivalry itself just kind of got away. And then you had Mississippi State, which was always going to be that rival. As far as Arkansas, I mean, man, I am so sick of the damn golden boot. I wish they would take that
Yeah.
golden boot and whoever made it, they would stick it to steal one from the rock so far up
Yeah.
to get rid of that thing, man. It's just, I've hated the fact that they tried to make this a rivalry from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, we're gonna make this a SEC rivalry right here, come hell or high water,
When did it start?
and
Did it
oh
start in the
man,
McFadden years? Like, was that kinda where it
that was
started?
some of the early years. That was some of the early years because I mean, you had the McFadden Felix Jones game. I mean,
Yeah.
and you had some good games and
Yeah.
stuff, but it was just always like,
Manufactured, it felt,
yeah,
forced.
manufactured, and kind of like you growing up, and your parents are like, you're gonna marry that girl over there.
Yeah.
Come
Yeah.
hell or high water, you're marrying that girl. Well, every time you look at that girl, you're just like, oh my god, I mean, for real. And so I really wish that they would just do away with that. And if you didn't have that damn golden boot, it would probably be a lot easier because they wouldn't call it a trophy game and they wouldn't call it
Yeah.
a rivalry.
Yeah.
I would love to see that game replaced with Auburn.
Yeah.
I think
Auburn's a
when
good
you
one.
look at I think when you look at any SEC series that involves LSU football, nothing compares to the LSU Auburn series.
That's a
I
good
mean,
one.
just
Yeah.
when you consider all of the pageantry, all of the tradition, all of the stuff that's happened that has just made that into what it is. I mean, hell, anytime, when LSU and Auburn, the last time that they played, and every time that they would play, I remember in the game notes, you would have like 20 something games listed as far as games that they have names for
Yeah.
because the games just something happened, whether it was the barn burning the night Rayon Hill returned the interceptions for a touchdown at Auburn,
Earthquake game was
Tuberville and them lighting up cigars, early Doucette getting hit before the ball got to him and LSU losing on that game. I remember you had the one where the extra point to where they called the extra point infraction on LSU for like trying to jump on top of a player to get to you had that you
Cole
had the Matt
Tracy.
Flynn to Demetrius Bird,
The Cole
Fournette
Tracy
just
game.
running roughshod over those guys, Cole Tracy, so I just think that there's if you wanted to the Auburn LSU game calling the Auburn LSU game a rival game is so much more appropriate than
in Arkansas.
anything that
Yeah.
resembles LSU Arkansas as a rival.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
really disappointed in that, but I totally expected that. I
Yeah.
totally expected them to have to go to that route. I don't mind not having to play Alabama every year.
Yeah,
You
me
know,
either.
Alabama's not what Alabama was. So the SEC to get to the SEC championship game, you're not required to go through Tuscaloosa now. You
Yeah.
know, and so I think that there's enough parity in the league now to where you want to play those best teams, the Georgias, the Texas, those guys and stuff.
Yeah.
So, not having to play Alabama, not playing Florida every year, those don't bother me. But I really wish we could see LSU and Auburn each year.
Yeah, I agree. I think Florida was always that game for me growing up. That just
Yeah.
I always got that feel, that same Auburn kind of feel, and Auburn did too. I mean, I loved all the Auburn
But you
games
didn't live
growing
through
up.
the Spurrier years.
I didn't
If you would
know.
have lived through the
Yeah,
Spurrier years when he was at Florida, hell, you would not want to see that orange and blue every
they
year.
were they were rough. They were rough. All right.
Oh man,
Okay. All right. Well, let's kind of transition here into this weekend's game and what LSU has to face this weekend
big
against Ole
injury
Miss.
report.
They got some really interesting injury updates that we'll be learning here over the next couple days. Wednesday is the first official SEC injury report, so we'll learn more tonight about kind of the status of some of these players that we'll dive into. I think I can kind of kick it off from an LSU perspective, and then I'll pass it over to Sonny and we can get into some of the Ole Miss question marks. But for me, we asked Brian Kelly about four players. Gabriel Relaford, Caden Durham, Wes Weeks, and who was the other one? There
Straight
was one.
A's.
Treyez Green. Yeah. Sounds like the only one that is definitely not playing this week is Gabriel Relaford. Unfortunately, popped his shoulder out in that game last weekend against Southeastern. They're still deciding whether or not surgery is an option for Gabe, but he's not going to play this weekend at Ole Miss. The other ones, I think there's some cautious optimism that all three could potentially play. You got Wes Weeks with the calf injury. It sounds like he was doing some things last week in practice. I think they're going to continue to ramp him up this week in practice and potentially give it a go. I would expect him to potentially be questionable or maybe even a probable designation for him. I think Treyez Green went through all the pregame warm ups last week. He did everything but suit up. He did everything but suit up, and I think LSU feels really comfortable where he's at. Brian Kelly said that he will play this weekend. He was pretty emphatic about that, pretty thinks that's going to be something that happens, and so that'll be great to get Green back into the rotation offensively. And then with Durham, I think they listed him as day to day earlier in the week. He's dealing with an ankle sprain. They don't think it's a high ankle, so it's not going to be a seriously limiting ankle sprain from what we understand. But those are still things that just need treatment. They need rest. They need they need time to heal. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what he's listed at. I would guess questionable for Caden Durham. But I think my whole big thing on the running back room in particular is I think that Jawan Johnson has pushed himself into maybe making this a running back by committee kind of group. The first couple weeks of the season, it was Caden Durham getting 15, 16, 17 carries to where the other guys were getting maybe 4 or 5. I think we could see a pretty even split this weekend against Ole Miss. And certainly the injury to Durham could maybe factor into that a little bit, even if he does play. Give him 9, 10, 11 carries, give Juwan Johnson 9, 10, 11 carries, and kind of make it more of a 50-50 split. I do think that's something LSU could potentially wind up doing because I think Johnson's earned that opportunity and is proven to be a pretty dynamic weapon, not only just as a runner, but also in the passing game. He's really the only running back they've gotten involved in the passing game at any point this year. So I think those are just some thoughts on LSU. Do you have any thoughts on LSU before kind of diving into Ole Miss? Or
Yeah, I'm anxious to see if Durham is 100%, if Durham is good to go. I'm anxious to see if we saw so much of Jawan Johnson because
yeah,
it was Southeastern, or if we are about to see kind of a Josh Williams / Caden Durham role like we saw last year.
Yeah.
I also think that Brian Kelly, that he and Frank Wilson, they want to get Caleb Jackson just unleashed.
Okay.
I get the vibe, and I get the sense from talking to people that they think that he is one breakout game away from establishing the confidence that he needs to
Okay.
where he starts to put everything together. So I'm
Nice.
anxious to see if he can get that going, against Ole Miss. And like you said, a lot is going to depend on Caden Durham. But I think from a health perspective, outside of Gabe Relaford, I expect all of those guys to be able to go. You
Yeah.
flip it over to Ole Miss, and you've got the old quarterback debate that if you got two, you don't have one. And right now, Ole Miss has two, and they got two they like: Austin Simmons and Trinidad. Right? I
Trinidad
always want to call him.
Shambles.
I
Yeah.
always want to call him Christian,
Yeah.
the
Trinidad
champ,
Shambles.
Trinidad Shambles,
Yeah.
and two threats, two really. I don't want to say they kind of mirror one another because physically they don't, but
They can both run the system.
really, they can both run the system. They can both run the football. They both are good at getting rid of the football quickly, and that's going to be a big key for me on Saturday is whether LSU is able to throw that rhythm off and get some pressure. Not necessarily get the sacks because I know it's going to be hard to do that, but just get some pressure and just throw them off rhythm just a little bit.
Yeah.
A couple of big ones that Ole Miss fans are looking for is Caleb Cunningham, the star wide receiver. LSU fans remember him. He's got. I'm not sure what his injury is, but there there's some talk of whether or not that he's going to be good to go on Saturday. And of course, you got Luke Hass, the big tight end. We've seen him how much of a threat he is,
Yeah.
not only in the passing game but also in the run game from a blocking standpoint. So, those are some that Ole Miss fans are going to be keeping an eye on, and obviously LSU fans. Uh, you know, Jumping on the quarterback thing real quickly, I would love to see Lane Kiffin try to play both. Try to play both and get into one of those situations to where he tries to play both. Neither one of them really has a lot of success, and then he starts playing musical chairs with them, kind of like Spurrier used to do back in the day.
Yeah.
To where he would rotate the guys like that, and because I really think that can help the LSU defense get the Ole Miss offense, keep the Ole Miss offense from really getting into that rhythm to where they just are chugging along. That makes this the type of game that we saw 2 years ago. That ended on Jaden Daniels' pass hitting the turf in the end zone.
Yeah. I think for me, this, while not exactly the same, I can see kind of the comparisons here, but can LSU learn from maybe last year where it was going into that Texas A&M game, Connor Wegman versus Marcel Reed, like which guy was going to play? I think there was some chatter going into that game that they could potentially see both of those guys in that game. And obviously those are two different quarterbacks. Wegman was much more your pocket passer and Reed was much more of your run and gun kind of quarterback. Um, but I get kind of the same sense here. Like, I think if they try to get Austin Simmons ready to play in this game and he's okay to play, I think they will start him. Um, but I also think that if he's struggling, they won't hesitate to go to Chambliss because of how important this game is on their schedule. I think that if he's not ready to play, they feel obviously comfortable with Shambles going out there and managing the game plan. And I think from looking at it from an Ole Miss perspective, this LSU game is maybe not the one if Austin Simmons is not 100% ready to run him out for. Like I think that if he's moving a little bit gingerly on that ankle still, I think LSU is a kind of defense that can get pressure on him. They can make things difficult, and he's turned the ball over 4 or 5 times in his couple starts that he's had this year. So he hasn't exactly been protecting the ball as much as a guy like Chambliss has since getting into the lineup. So I think for me, um, I would probably lean that they go Chambliss in this game. This is just a completely educated guess. This is not any kind of inside information or anything. But I feel like this is a game where Chambliss is playing so well, and Simmons, if Simmons is not a totally 100% to ready to go and play in this game and play effectively, why even like make that something to where you could potentially see both of them in a game kind of thing. Like I don't think Ole Miss is going to come out and say it between now and Saturday. Like I think they're going to try to keep LSU guessing. But if I were to guess right now, I think Chambliss is probably the guy that they go to on Saturday. Is that kind of your feel?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that neither one of these teams has strike one yet.
Yeah,
I kind of look at it. I kind of look at it to where when you lose that third game, then you're like you're going to need some help
yeah,
to get into the playoff. So neither one of these teams have a strike right now.
yeah,
So your backs aren't up against the wall. It's not a situation to where, like even like, okay, if it was Garrett Nussmeyer and if Garrett Nussmeyer was not 100%, this is not after what you got from Michael Van Buren last week. I think you would go into this game of saying like, okay, do we want to risk for the further damage? Because LSU's in a different situation than they've ever been in under Brian Kelly because they
yeah,
didn't lose that first game.
yeah.
You know, and
I
even though that first game.
I think if Nuss was a little hampered but still healthy enough to play, he would still be playing. Like I think
Oh no, I'm just, and I guess the point that I'm trying to make is neither one of these coaches have to look at this from a situation of Ole Miss didn't lose to Kentucky
sure,
or
yeah,
one
I
of
get
those
that. Yeah,
games that they've been known to blow in the past, and
sure,
LSU didn't lose the season opener like they had. So LSU. In a normal year under Brian Kelly, LSU goes into this game like, okay, damn, you could be 3-2
yeah,
after this week. You know,
yeah,
and so I think both of these teams go into this in a perspective of a loss is not the end of the world.
yeah.
You know,
That's true.
a
Yeah,
loss a loss is not going to derail any plans or make you go back and reverse course on anything that you have planned. It's not going to throw up the flag and say, "Oh crap, what are we going to do?" You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so I kind of like it. It's kind of, I guess, it's kind of uncharted waters for us as LSU fans and people who
sure.
cover LSU to not to go into a game like this and not have that mindset of, "Oh wait, LSU hasn't lost yet, so they haven't. They don't have strike one.
Yeah,
You're not in danger of having two strikes before you even hit the midway point of the season. So I think with both of those, I think in that situation with them playing so earlier in the season and stuff, both of them kind of have a you know they're not in neither one of them isn't in any sort of dire circumstance whatsoever. So
yeah,
you can be a little looser, like Gabe Relaford. If Gabe Relaford, if they decide that Gabe Relaford is like, hey, I'm just going to have to push through this. I'm gonna push through this pain.
yeah,
I'm gonna hit it up at halftime if I have to, or you know what I mean. How
yeah,
the college game and how the pro game works, and I would not even be opposed to where if he says if he does that and if he's going to fight through it all season and stuff, give him next week off. If he
yeah.
can give you 12 to 15 reps this week, and his situation is not going to worsen from now to 3 weeks from now, and it's just a matter of pain management, then, you know, I wouldn't have a problem with them playing him, but I don't think it's a situation where you feel like you have to. It's just a case of if this is what he's gonna be all season long, then why wouldn't you play him in a big game?
Well, I think probably just for the Relaford example in particular, if they feel like they don't need surgery and they feel like 2 weeks because they have the bye week next week and they feel like
Yeah,
two
yeah,
weeks
yeah, yeah,
2 weeks could really give him that opportunity to feel like he's feeling good and get, kind of get the treatment and whatever to get that thing right. Then I could
yeah.
see why not playing him this week, which just sounds like what's going to happen with him.
Okay,
He's not.
okay. Yeah, I didn't know if it was just strictly a pain management type
Yeah,
of deal,
I
like
think it
to where.
I think, yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that they know that answer yet, though, because they're still deciding whether or not surgery is on the table. So, all right, well, that good discussion there. Good updates there on the injury side. We got the schedule reveal stuff in, and then we'll be back, a little bit later in the week. We're gonna have our preview and predictions piece up on Friday with our podcast, and so we'll dive much more into the actual game of LSU Ole Miss here in a few days. But for now, he's Sonny Ship. I'm Glenn West. Thanks for watching and listening to the Go 24/7 podcast.